I often marvel at what a perfect storm it was that Supergiant Games was able to succeed so well with Hades. Not to say that Hades is a bad game, nor that Supergiant Games are undeserving of their success. But when you think about the launch of the titles in 2020, which were all making a big splash in the general cultural consciousness and video game landscape, dominating conversations month to month, Hades should have been buried. Aside from experience with the fact that Supergiant has been making solid narrative stories mixed with gameplay since the beginning, this was the baby. This is the one that had such monumental success that they're getting a sequel, and maybe like another team member. And I think it's an avalanches of good choices and good game design that got them there. Supergiant Games' team has been working with their limits for years, and this is one of those wonderful little teams of like 20 guys in a room who always tried something new while maintaining consistent quality. Now, I'm not actually going to talk about the development of this game. I will say the entire reason I picked it up was actually because of this character modeling video. Paige Carter did this little abbreviation of her process for modeling, and it was like so nice to listen to. She just seemed like she was given a PR prompt and kind of had to run with it. Like, I don't know, something about it was just so charming that I had to see what this was about. If you want to check out the minutiae of the development, I'll put links in the description, and these are the general videos and sources I'm going to give you. No Clip literally has a series on this. And I do love this moment in an interview I stumbled on, by the way.
So Odysseus coming to Hades in 2021, is that what we're saying? Same here.
We don't know what's next.
And the Oracle Darth Burrito has spoken. Anyway, my point is that a lot of people who are much smarter and more well-versed in the video game world have already gone into the development of this game. And I'm here today to mostly just talk about what I think works in the final product, as an armchair enthusiast who is mainly focusing on story and the game's ability to inspire player motivation. There are no dev experts in this house. Nor am I going to start breaking down numbers to you for the stats or how the gameplay feels. This is all very surface level. Also, hi, my handle's name is Crow. If you can hear my sniffles, that's because I'm still sick, but screw it. I've been sick for like 2 weeks and I've wanted to make this video for a month. If you like what I do here, you can find me on Twitter, Insta, or anywhere on that link tree below. Let's move on. So, Supergiant, why is Hades so good? Number 1, we have $10 and a packet of gum. From what I've seen of Supergiant's documentaries and dev diaries, they tend to stress a prioritization of having normal work hours and avoiding crunch, and as far as I understand, there have been no scandals in-house, and it's just like, a nice team to root for. But I think a very vital thing is that they know how to work within their limits. Bastion started with a team of 7, and they ended up with a game that had about 6 hours worth of content and 20 if you were a completionist. Transistor also has a 6-hour time range and 16 hours if you're a madman. Pyre 11 hours and 21 hours if you want all the trophies. By the time we got to Hades, the baseline gameplay would take you about 23 hours, just to complete the main story. And I don't want to equate the time to beat with quality, but just to make the point that Supergiant with a team of about 20 people was able to make a longer experience. That I think gave it an edge to go a little bit more mainstream than something like a shorter indie game would. And obviously, when you think about it, playing a run of Hades is still pretty short. A run in Hades will probably take you roughly 30 minutes, give or take. That's just enough time that you feel satisfied when you get to the end, and just short enough that you can trick yourself into thinking that you do have enough time for just one more run. Binding of Isaac lived and breathed on this time range. Vampire Survivors owns my soul on this exact time range. But good for Supergiant, it also means that you as a dev team don't have to work with making more than 30 minutes worth of content. Instead of increasing the breadth of how many environments you have to make, you now just have to think about making the set amount you have as good as it can possibly be. Now, I'm not a game developer, so consider this my armchair expertise and cultish following of Vampire Survivors speaking, but it seems like it's a lot easier to work with a specific set of locations and enemies than to try to create an entirely new map set with new enemies and new art direction. Adding abilities, fine-tuning weapons, upgrades, or areas or characters feels like something that early access gives them a lot of breathing room to do. It basically feels like the law of this game's development was encouraged to go deep, not really wide, which I think is good. I mean, like they say they splurged on voice acting for this game, and my god, have you seen how many lines of dialogue you're allowed to have and how much variety there is? It's actually crazy. This has nothing to do with anything, but I can't get over how Zagreus' voice actor pronounces his P's and T's so crisply.
Always wanted to ask you something, Father. Whose skull is that there on your shoulder? If it's not too personal.
Ugh, it's so good. And I think the charm about Hades is that it's actually very simple to get into. A lot of people were complaining that, the gameplay wasn't that complicated. But I think the thing is that you can add complexity, and that allows you as a player to be able to approach it a lot easier, but can get monotonous if the dev team doesn't do anything to discourage that. The roguelike genre, as it is popularized to be today, is basically the phrase "get good idiot" in video game form. You're expected to be replaying this constantly and getting slightly better stats as you go. Though roguelike emphasizes an aspect of randomization, you're not disappointed to be fighting the same 3 bosses over and over again. And variations in encounters, such as different mini-bosses per dungeon, allows the player base for this type of game to give the small team some grace. In addition to the variety of encounters that the game will have by default, the game encourages you, the player, to leave your comfort zone and vary how you play. The most basic example I can think of is how the passive buff Dark Thirst is attached to a different weapon each round. So if you use the randomly selected weapon, you are going to pick up more upgrade currency. You can play an entire run without ever touching the other weapons that you don't like, but that little reward encourages you to just, maybe try it out. It's like a gentle parenting mom trying to teach you how to eat your vegetables. And suddenly you find that even though you hated the spear for like 20 runs, on run 21, you get it. You understand the right combination of boons and upgrades to make this your new favorite toy. And speaking of boons, you will always have your favorites. You can go and collect more, and the charms that you have will give you a varying likelihood to have more of the same type of boon that you want. But as in every neighborhood, you still have to play with the kids you don't like sometimes. But once duo boons are introduced, suddenly you find yourself wanting to get acquainted with the people who you probably didn't want to at first. Suddenly you're trying to make best friends with Artemis even though you hate her boon pack. That's probably just me. And if you give ambrosia to these gods, you're able to get bonuses and little charms of luck. So there's kind of also a gameplay motivation there to keep talking to them in the hopes that having a better relationship will give you better perks. Also, the prophecy system on that fated list just gives you significant rewards if you try out basically everything at least once. I have changed so many of my runs last minute because I saw that little scroll icon and decided that fine, it looks lame, but I'll do it. I will finally try this out. And then that boon became my favorite thing to use. Or I decided that no, Big Chop does rightfully belong in the trash. Also, the 6 weapons you have are able to unlock different aspects using rewards from boss battles to switch up basically the bonuses or moveset depending on which aspect you're using. That not only makes you want to play again to test out the new toys and feel the difference in how you play, but it encourages you to beat a boss on a little bit of a harder difficulty to unlock more new aspects and try those out. Which leads me obviously to the heat system, where you're able to get more significant rewards by repeating runs with an increased heat through the Pact of Punishment, but you're also forced to switch up the gameplay challenges. And everyone can have their own opinion on this, but I think a really good thing about the Pact of Punishment is how customizable it is. You can technically never engage with it if you're an unconfident player and you just want to go at your own pace using weapons, and you do this over and over again knowing you'll never get the ultimate boon that you need for like an upgrade material, but you can always like trade a large amount of easier stuff to gain at the shop in Hades instead of having to fight that boss. But if you make a heat level too difficult, it's your own fault because you chose the bonuses and challenges you were going to do. It's a little level of tailoring that I think circumvents a lot of frustration. And upping the challenge is fun, but some players don't realize that until it's too late. So gameplay-wise, Hades was encouraging you to try out different experiences with every run. But you as a player still need to be motivated to battle your way to the surface world again and again beyond gameplay. And I think for Hades, the story is a significant reason why it caught such a wide audience. Part 2, the meat and potatoes. Hades 2 recently came out in early access, and I think the hottest take that I have is that I think Hades 2's premise is weaker than Hades's. But I don't really know how it could have been stronger, given that Supergiant is a company that was able to merge gameplay and story, and they had such a stroke of brilliance and the perfect storm of pop culture relevance when they decided to do the story that they did in Hades. See, the choice of Greek mythology is actually surprisingly relevant because we were in a period of time where everyone was pretty into Greek mythos and at least had like a passing interest or understanding of it in the pop culture zeitgeist beyond the Hercules movie. All those Percy Jackson stans had grown up and started making their own content, I guess. But also, consider the angle that they could have used, because I don't think that Hades would have been as good of a game if it started with its original concept. Originally, this game was under the working title of Minos or Minos, where you are actually going to play as our favorite pro wrestling villain Theseus, who was fighting his way through a labyrinthian maze to fight the Minotaur. The pitch was that each run would be a retelling of the story of how Theseus defeated the bull. And I see 2 problems with that. The first is that you don't really have a reason to do it again. Once you defeat the bull from your own curiosity, you've technically finished. There is no need to have any other retellings. You don't really need a reason to do this over and over again. You and I probably lived and breathed The Binding of Isaac for years on the gameplay loop alone. But Binding of Isaac was also insane, and this is Supergiant. They want a reason for you to go back into that dungeon, and they want it to be canon. But a retelling means that you don't really feel change, so it can feel monotonous pretty fast if it's just the same story with slight variations. Second reason, Theseus's pursuit of the Minotaur is too aggressive to be immediately relatable. After you've satisfied your own curiosity for the first run, it's now an aggressive motivation that asks a lot of you to be invested in defeating one enemy. And with Theseus being a hero, the gods are distant business partners who are now aiding you in a common goal and are probably going to be a little bit more distant. You have Icarus, Daedalus, and Ariadne to work with as possible side characters in this story, sure, but all of your eggs are in one missed basket, and it's not a particularly popular one. You just really have to hate that bull to keep going back over and over, and I'm not that vindictive or petty. Maybe you are, but I could see myself in another universe where this was the premise, beating this game once, and then going, that was neat, and returning it like I would every other Call of Duty game. Yes, I was a filthy campaigner. Lucky for us, Supergiant also didn't quite like this premise, so they looked elsewhere for their main plot. Upon further research, they came up with the idea of the son of Hades, Zagreus, trying to escape the underworld, and I don't know if they knew this, but I don't think they could have picked a better Greek god or family to focus on. The thing is that Hades, I will say, is arguably one of the most well-known gods because there's so little mythos on him, so Hades and Persephone as a Greek canon story is one of those things that's kind of hard to mess up. You know Perseus' name, and you probably know that Hercules is Heracles, but you may not know their specific labors. That can be lost to you. You may know the Trojan War was a thing, but you may not know the specific events. So you know of heroes, but Hades doesn't have that much going on for him, but what he does have is a very evocative story that's pretty simple to follow, and already has a similar folktale going on that you can relate it to. The kidnapping of Persephone is a piece of lore that has been reinterpreted over and over again, and very recently, within the years that this game was coming out, had been given a new framework in pop culture. So basically, if people knew about Hades, they knew about Persephone, and they will be thinking about that Beauty and Beast stuff, and they will also be thinking about the retellings that they saw before, and they may also be thinking about those endless Hades and Persephone retellings they have been able to find on Kindle Unlimited, by the way. But also, the location of Hades as the underworld is a very evocative place for a lot of myths and cultures widely. People like to cheat death. It's one of those centrally fascinating cultural stories that we fixate on universally. So I think a lot of mythologies happen to have a story about escaping the underworld or navigating through it. So you may not know anything about escaping Hades, but you at least know enough to want to escape hell. All these years later, and that conflation actually works to our benefit. And Hades as a location lends the writers the ability to pull from even more Greek myths, with Hades and Persephone's story as our main gameplay story reward, and that just hits all the right bells. So is it just delving into the underworld setting alone that makes this work? I don't really think so. As you probably recall, 2020 was the year of the lockdowns, and Hades was actually quite a cozy game when you get down to it. Theseus going to defeat a bull over and over again is quite grim and probably there for the glory, and your motivation would be something that's, I think, a little bit separate from the character. But you've probably been a teenager that's had enough of your parental guidance and just wanted to get away for a little while. And it's that domestic angle that they took with the House of Hades that I think really works. I will forever be happy that the Greeks decided that the king of the underworld had a dog named Spot. In this interview, Supergiant Games credits that the idea to make the story a family drama started because they saw that Cerberus was just Hades' pet. And they were like, wow, that's pretty domestic. What a wonderful angle to work with. The story of Hades is about rebuilding broken relationships with your loved ones. You start the game as a kid who's literally running away from home trying to escape his father for what he believes to be forever. To do that, he has to reach out to his distant, estranged family and reconnect with them to make progress. And your side quests are about mending other relationships, reuniting Orpheus with Eurydice, Patroclus with Achilles, and even when you free Sisyphus from his undead obligation of pushing a boulder up, he's made too strong of a connection with his pet rock to leave her. And the thing about this framing is that it gives you a very positive spin on this goal. Every time a god gives you a boon, they talk to you in this very warm, excitable way because they think you're coming to see them and they want to meet you. As you exchange more boons with them, you get to know what they would be like as a family, and you're just kind of meeting them as you try to make your way up, and you see that they're welcoming, they're joking with you, they're playing off each other. Suddenly you see their sigil, and it's not only that you're happy that you're going to get the reward you want, but you're kind of excited to talk to their character. And you, Zagreus, are a rebellious teenage son who's kind of aimless and trying to escape his dad's house, as far as you know in the early game. When you fail, there's not some bleak punishment. It's actually the equivalent of getting sent back to your room for bad behavior. And your room's not that bad. The House of Hades has all these people that are already rooting for Zagreus and care about him openly, and you can see that the problem here is just kind of his dad's attitude, and that needs to change or Zagreus needs to leave, whichever comes first. And again, the selection of the underworld is still very good because even if you don't care about Zagreus' struggle, you, the gamer, want to see the surface world art just once after you've been entrenched in all these murky greens, this flood of red, or these ghostly blues. It'd be nice to see something pleasant. Perhaps have your character walk in a place where enemies aren't trying to backstab him all the time. And if you're paying attention to the story and you hear that Zagreus is searching for Persephone, you may be like me and immediately sit up in your chair, because you know that pop culture has a pretty good understanding of the myth of Persephone, but you also know that modern day interpretations can go one of two very significant ways. You at least want to see which angle they play, if not her character design. So as you're going, maybe your natural curiosity is kind of hitting you, but then you finally get up there and you finally see the world design and you finally get to meet Persephone, and then it hits you. Zagreus is finally getting to meet his mom for the first time in his life. I didn't cry, you cried. And you think, oh my god, this is the story, this is it. You know, this was rewarding, this is sweet, I am so here for this. And, you know, happy ending, right? If this is the entire gameplay loop, I am here for it. But then no, this is Supergiant. There has to be a canon reason why you go back. And Zagreus, born to the underworld, can't be on the surface, so he has to return to the House of Hades. And you realize that Zagreus only got to see Persephone for a few seconds. And now you look at this kid and you realize that you want to help him go back because he didn't have enough time with his mama. Even if the story didn't progress past this point, I would have been clocking in for my 30-minute gameplay loop with the reward of knowing that Zagreus got to have like a nice lunch with his mom every now and then. That's all I really needed. But no, instead, the more you keep returning to the House of Hades, the more you have to talk with your dad, who is the final boss, the more you learn about your family circumstances, probably the more you care, and then the more you rejoice when you finally see that family photo of you and your parents reunited over the bedroom wall. And her little pillow! But wait, now there's no reason to keep returning to the surface. Why would you play the roguelike again? Zagreus in the early game has been implied to be an aimless trust fund baby that really doesn't know his place in his own house. But now that his dad has a better understanding of him and doesn't want to wedge him into a job that he's not suited for, he instead plays to his son's strengths. You're now the official security tester. Replay the game at your own leisure. And it's funny because it changes the context of when you get up there and fight your dad. It's basically all in the name of good sport. And if you really care, you can now make an effort to reach back to the family members who helped you get to this position and haven't met you formally yet. Reaching out to Olympus to arrange a party to make amends and form stronger connections, reuniting two sides of a family, is the most wholesome ending that I could possibly ask for in this game. But I think the underpinning thing that I appreciate in Hades is that there was this kind of lack of urgency to everything. The stakes are pretty low when the worst thing that happens to you is that you get sent back home for bad behavior. And when you exit the game for the day, leaving Zagreus, he's stuck in the domain of Hades, which may not be perfect, but he has a bed to sleep in, family and friends that are supporting him, and he can always try it again tomorrow, slowly chipping at improving his home and finding his way out. There's just this very good marriage of character motivation and player motivation to get you invested emotionally and mechanically in developing the story. It's just neat. Now, with Hades 2 out in early access, understand that this game will be my personality for the next year, and I encourage you all to go check it out. But premise-wise, I think the darker tone of rescuing the fallen House of Hades, reaching out to gods who are mainly focused on defeating Kronos instead of chilling out, and having a whole game around vengeance is just, not quite hitting the same. The repeat levels for training feel fine, and I love hanging out in the main hub. Kronos being the god of time obviously makes your replay reason a canon thing that's pretty cool, but I think of Theseus and the Bull, of revenge and that darker bitterness and urgency carrying the story, instead of this lighthearted optimism and curiosity. I wish Hades 2 and Supergiant all the prosperity they deserve. But I will never forget how quickly I saw a kid running from a dad he didn't like to see a bigger and better world, and I said, yeah, let's do this. Thanks again to my Patreons for making this possible, and I will see you in the next one.